All right, let's see it. So there are 4 statements of fact in this image. One is uncontroversially true. One is close to being true, but is also wildly misleading. The other 2 are pure fabrication. The uncontroversially true statement is that there are 7,957 verses in the New Testament. The kind of true statement that is also wildly misleading is that there are 25,000 ancient manuscripts of the New Testament. It's actually a little over 27,000, but this counts all manuscripts in all languages from our earliest manuscript all the way down to the printing press around 1500 CE. And the overwhelming majority of those manuscripts come in the second half of that window. So come in the medieval period after 1000 CE. And most of them are in Latin as well. They're being transmitted during the medieval period. When we look at Greek manuscripts, we have a little over 5,800 Greek manuscripts. And again, the overwhelming majority of them come in the latter half of that window. Here's a chart showing the century which our earliest Greek New Testament manuscripts come from, and also the textual tradition to which they belong. So the dark maroon in the back, the Byzantine tradition, is where the overwhelming majority come from, and they come from after 800 CE, and that is also the tradition that has the most variation from what is generally considered to be the most reliable tradition. In the first 300 years of the transmission of the New Testament, we have maybe 124 manuscripts. Maybe 3 of them contain the entire New Testament, and those all come at the very end of that window. Our earliest manuscript of any kind dates to about 125 CE, contains like 36 or 37 words of the tens of thousands of words in the New Testament. So we can't even cobble together a full New Testament until that earliest full copy of the New Testament in the mid to late 4th century CE. Additionally, we don't know what was going on in the textual transmission of these texts between their composition and our earliest textual witness to them. And that is a black hole for textual criticism. We just don't know, and we're going to come back to that. Now, the 2 statements of fact that are just pure fabrication. One is the 99.5% accuracy claim. This is a number that was literally just made up. Norman Geisler, in a couple of different publications, claimed that the textual critic Bruce Metzger estimated the New Testament to be 99.5% textually accurate. Bruce Metzger never made any such statement whatsoever. Norman Geisler just made it up and attributed it to Metzger. And when he was called on this, he said, well, it doesn't matter. Look at all these other figures. They have estimated that maybe 1 in 20 variants is meaningful. Maybe 1 in 60 variants is meaningful. Maybe 1 in 1,000 variants is meaningful. And so he took a bunch of guesstimates by scholars who were just riffing on how many textual variants are meaningful, and he cobbled all these guesstimates together and said they average out to about 99.5% accuracy. So this is a made-up number that was then validated by averaging guesstimates from New Testament textual critics. So that number is simply false. And then the 40 verses that can't be resolved with textual criticism claim, that is just looking at 7,957 verses and saying, what is 0.5% of 7,957? Oh, 40 verses? Okay, that must be how many verses cannot be resolved with textual criticism. Now, I want to return to the biggest problem here. The elephant in the room is that black hole between the composition of these texts and our earliest textual witnesses. Because when scholars talk about textual criticism and how sure we can be and how few verses are unsure, they're talking about based on the manuscripts that we have. Here are the readings that are unsure. And those readings are the readings that are found in the existing manuscripts. Because many textual critics think you should not do any conjectural emendations. In other words, you should only propose a reading if we have a manuscript that contains that reading. And this is an enormous assumption. This is assuming that every single word that was written in the original autographs of the New Testament is somewhere preserved across the thousands of different manuscripts. That there is not a single word that was composed by a New Testament author writing an original manuscript that was lost in that black hole between the original composition of the text and our earliest textual witness. That is a dogma. There are no data that support that. In fact, I would argue that the data argue directly against that, because the further we go back in time in our manuscripts, the more likely a given verse is to have a variant. There is more textual instability in our earliest manuscripts than in our later manuscripts, because as these manuscripts circulate more widely and as people are comparing them, they start to harmonize them, they start to standardize a textual tradition. And so there is a big assumption among more conservative textual critics that that black hole has no differences in it. And that assumption is wildly irresponsible.